people, welcome to your weekly Patreon bonus episode. We are continuing with Alphabet Roulette, and this week for you, we watched Unbreakable.
Kimmy Schmitz.
The you pick for you.
Yeah, so we don't know this movie. It was, I believe, written and directed by old M. Night Shyamalan. I'm going to say it right this time. Give the man some respect.
Thanks. I'm sure that he would appreciate that.
Yeah.
If he were watching our Patreon bonus episode about Unbreakable.
These fucking motherfuckers. It's not Shyamalan. Anyway, starring Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis. That's pretty much.
And Robin Wright Penn.
And that's his wife?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Pretty
And their
much
kid.
all you got to know about.
So if you don't know, this movie is about a man who
an ordinary
believes that he cannot get hurt. Slowly finds out that he cannot get hurt.
Yeah, he makes an extraordinary discovery when a train accident leaves his fellow passengers dead and him unscathed. The answer to this mystery could lie with the mysterious Elijah Price, a.k.a. Mr. Glass.
Drop the glue. Just ass.
A man who suffers from a disease that renders his bones as fragile as glass.
Brittle bones disease. And
so
he's a level 1 out of 5. So he's kind of weak on the weak bones. He's got strong weak bones compared to people who have weak bones.
But his superpower, I guess, is his brilliant comic book nerd mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
pure intellect.
So yeah, we'll have to get into spoilers because that's kind of just where this movie goes. Mm-hmm. The twist is a spoiler, and I guess I like the twist in this because it's so small.
Like it's before it was played out in his career.
Yeah, and it's not like, what? That's crazy. He was a ghost? It's more just like, oh, okay.
And
that makes sense.
That was the twist in The Village that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, he was a ghost.
Turned out that The Village was a ghost village.
Everybody was dead.
Well, so that's an interesting thing because when I was reading about what Shyamalan wanted to do with this movie, he wanted to market it as a comic book superhero movie.
I don't think it was at all.
And it wasn't, and I'm of the opinion that he was wrong there because I think this movie works better if it's marketed as like a typical Shyamalan, because this is how
thriller,
it was done, was like a Shyamalan thriller in the vein of The Sixth Sense, obviously, because they wanted to market everything post Sixth Sense of his like it was another Sixth Sense. And while I don't think this quite reaches the heights, I do think going in not knowing that it's a comic book superhero movie would have worked really well. That's why I don't like that it opens with that like thing that just, again, and especially if you don't know what the movie is about, like you're going in and watching it, it just has this random title card at the beginning that tells you about how many comic books are sold every year.
It's hella random.
Yeah, and how popular comic books are. And it's like, I really wish that he hadn't just like laid his cards out about what the movie was. But at the same time, I'm saying that from a perspective of somebody who is now sick of comic book movies.
Yeah, I think it's maybe different in an era that's around the time that like X-Men is getting released.
When people
around
needed
the time
to explain to them
that
why
Spider-Man
comic
is
books
getting
were cool.
released.
And that's also the interesting thing about this movie is that I feel like he was way ahead of the curve with Unbreakable and then fell way behind the curve by the time Glass came out. Because that movie I think does not work at all, especially when you compare it to other comic book movies that have come out since Unbreakable. But I still think Unbreakable works pretty darn well. But I want to hear your guys' opinions on it since this was my pick. And yeah, overall, I think it when I was a kid, it really blew me away that the twist was that he was a superhero and that it was a comic book thing. That felt super fresh. It was a surprise. And I like the subtlety with which all of it is handled. It doesn't get into big, crazy Marvel CG battle at the end fights, and it keeps it feeling like this is a real-world person who is discovering that there are superheroes in the real world. I like the way that the movie handles it.
Now, I mean, are we going to just say how we feel, mark it as spoilers, and then continue the conversation, or is that...
I think we're already...
We're already there then. So, yeah, I mean, if you just look at it purely on the fact that during this entire time, just based on the fact that he survived, Glass is convinced that he is, he's a superhero at this point.
My nemesis.
But yeah, like the effort of trying to find his nemesis, and basically by the end of the film, kind of resigning himself to turning himself in by making that physical contact. Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting play. And I think that it kind of puts it really removes that like the giant like knockout drag out fight that we're so used to at the end, which I think is still something that hasn't been like replicated in any way, shape, or form. And I think for a movie to have been, semi-successful and had kind of like this this air of like common thriller film and played it like that the entire way across, keep it kind of a mystery until you start to discover like that maybe he had kind of played things up in his life beforehand, like faking the injury, and that because he didn't want to play football anymore. I think that sort of stuff like is really, really interesting.
Well, I love the way that all of that stuff is unraveled throughout the movie, partially or mostly because Willis's character is so in denial about the whole thing and also just doesn't really want to talk about it or talk about his feelings or share any of this stuff, really. So you get kind of the reveals about, I mean, to me, the best scene in the movie is the scene with him and his son lifting the weights and how that slowly starts to reveal like that he has super strength, and the way that you get shown that he has a weakness to water, and then that is incorporated with the raincoat being his like superhero costume, basically like his cape and his disguise.
And part of his everyday attire.
Yeah.
To some degree.
Yeah. And I like that at the end, it doesn't, like, he is not the kind of guy who would go like, okay, cool, now I have super strength and there's this like terrorist, I'm going to punch a hole in his fucking face. To me, this feels like really what I think a lot of people probably wanted to see out of a Superman story for a long time, is just like, what if Superman actually did exist in the real world and either was in denial about being Superman or didn't know that he was Superman? Like, how would a person like that like go through the world? And at the end, him just turning Mr. Glass in and having him committed feels a lot more like a true Superman move, as opposed to what Superman does like at the end of Man of Steel, of snapping Zod's neck and doing that whole thing, and people were pissed about that, not feeling Superman. This to me feels like it would be against David Dunn's nature at the end of the movie to like just beat the shit out of Glass and kill him.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make any sense. His whole thing is about protecting people, and that's an inherent part of his job and his personality, and that plays into this whole like, I think they call him the overseer in Glass. It's really stupid, but like just the whole like security like bit of his like, it all just fits together so well. I think it's a really smart movie, and the way that it's shot, you can tell, or I could tell, having seen it a bunch of times, that Shyamalan was trying to go for like a comic book feel, but not in the way that someone like Ang Lee was trying to go for the comic book feel,
where you actually have the panels.
Yeah, where he's like doing panels, but in this it was more like, how do I use color palettes, where like when David starts to realize he has the power to like touch people and kind of figure out what's going on in their lives and see who's good and who's bad, you get really smart, and Shyamalan's always great with color, you get really smart little like bits of color, and usually it's red, which hasn't been used throughout most of the rest of the movie. You get the color scheme of David, which is his green, like all green, and then that extends into his house and the bed sheets and the wallpaper, and then same with Glass, which is funny that purple tends to be like a villain color in comic books, but that also was just Sam Jackson loving purple, which is also why he has a purple lightsaber in Star Wars, is he's just like, motherfucker, if it could be purple, it's gonna be purple. But yeah, I just love that kind of stuff where it's like, he didn't go so overboard with the comic book thing that it became it just wouldn't have worked at the time that it came out if he had gone way too overboard with it. And I think he stays surprisingly conservative with what he's doing for an M. Night Shyamalan movie, like seeing where the rest of his career was going to go with this kind of stuff. He keeps it pretty cool, which is where I think it starts to break apart by the time you get to something like Glass, where it's trying to be a bit bigger scale and higher stakes and all this stuff. I'm like, no, make it a personal story about this guy and his family and the trauma that Mr. Glass has been through, having been born with this, all of his bones broken. I love that opening scene because it's horrifying.
Drop this baby?
Yeah, did you drop this baby? Yeah, and then the fact that most of the shots of Glass, when it cuts to him in a scene, he's reflected in some sort of glass. It's mirrors when he's born and when he's young, his TV screen when he's sitting alone in his room, in his art gallery, he's reflected in the panels of the comic books. So just like all kinds of stuff where it's like, if you've seen this movie multiple times, you're just picking up on all that and going like, oh, that's hella smart, that's hella smart. Like, you know, and I think that's why a lot of people, including myself, have been more or less disappointed by M. Night Shyamalan's output since these first several movies, where I'm like, damn, that dude, he like fucking knows how to direct a movie.
Yeah.
And
Well,
like, you know, he used to know how to execute his vision.
well, and I think that you even get to see, because this is relatively early in his career, you get to see some of like the more like Hallmark filmmaker moments of M. Night's in this film as well. Like the moment where Glass gets his first comic book,
and
the camera
does that
spins
crazy,
along
like,
with it. Yeah, that's some shit that's
that
been
completely
used.
unnecessary spin where, like, because he's spinning the comic and the camera's spinning, it just ends up like in the exact same place it ended up to begin with, but he did it just because it was cool looking.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's, like I said, those are...
And it's showing his world's been turned around.
Those types of camera movements and placements have been commonplace throughout his entire career, including in things like Servant, where there's
definitely.
a lot of really interesting camera work in some the episodes
that he directed.
Yeah.
And not to go too far off, but it's noticeably different when he's not directing that show.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I was like, oh, okay, you can.
The episodes that are directed by him and directed by his daughter are standouts,
Yeah.
and then everything else is whatever.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, for me, for Unbreakable, I mean, like I said, the twist where Glass is his like nemesis is so subtle and so well developed throughout the movie. Where he's like, yeah, I always thought there was a counterpart. Like we get hints dropped, and then when it's like, hey, I'm the one that's causing all of this, then you're like, oh shit, like that's pretty fucked up. But it also doesn't feel totally out of left field with something like that fucking beach movie. Was it Old?
Yeah,
Where the
Beach
twist is
Makes
like,
You
what
Old.
the fuck are you talking about? Like that's what this was, and it just wasn't. Like the groundwork wasn't laid for that. This has all the groundwork there, so when it happens, you're like, oh, that totally makes sense to me. And really, at the end of the day, this is just an origin story. Like if he would have continued to make Unbreakable 2, and I know we more or less got that to some degree, but it would have made sense. Like this is his Spider-Man 1. You know what I mean? Like it works really well. And you and I had talked about Willis's performance, on text conversation, and I was like, man, what does he do? Because I feel like he's always the same. But in this,
You made me like have that in mind while I was watching it this most recent time, because we had that conversation. I was like, I'm really gonna pay attention while watching it and see. And I think
it's all like under his eyes, dude, and he really is delivering a really
in that
good
scene when the
performance
kid's holding
here.
the gun on him,
And
and he's like, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna, and you can
Yeah.
tell like he's just like, you know,
That
he's got
scene-
so much repressed behind his face.
that
Yeah.
scene for him and the fucking kid, fantastic. I was like, good for you, dude. And then that scene when they're having breakfast after he and the wife like reconnect, and he like slowly slides over the newspaper, and he's like, I did that. And like, oh shit. For him, like there's subtleties in his facial features, and then the kid just, I think, starts crying, right? And I was like, god damn, like that relationship is really what makes this movie shine for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why my favorite scene is the scene with the kid and him lifting the weights, because you get that where like you can tell.
I put more on.
Yeah, and you like you're kind of in the kid's shoes, where at first you can't tell if he's gonna get pissed about it, or if his dad if he's gonna get pissed, or if he's excited, and then you see as it's going on, he's getting like more and more kind of like, yeah, this is pretty fucking cool. Like let's put more on, and then they got the paint cans on, and he's like looking at it, and even then it stays conservative with what it's doing, because the max weight that he lifts in that scene is like 400 pounds maybe, and if it was a modern superhero movie, it would be like he's throwing the thing through the ceiling and he can lift like 1 million. It's like,
Or you could pick up the whole house kind of
It's
shit.
not comic in that sense. It's like very realistic. It's very grounded. It's like a Nolan more.
It's about discovery in that moment.
Yeah.
It's not about like what kind of feat of strength can we like go past what you would believe.
yeah, and you also get, you were talking about how the reveal about them being nemesis and everything is built up so well. And I mean, everybody says this about villains now, but like the best villains are the ones where you can see that they are a human being who thinks they have the right intentions. And to me, like that's all, at least in this movie, before he becomes like, you know, crazy psycho supervillain in the future stuff. It feels like this makes sense. Like this guy has had a horrific, tragic life where he's had really no agency, like outside of the comic book stuff, and the comic book stuff has been the biggest influence in his life about the way he thinks about the world and the way he sees the world, and that's not the right way to see the world. And obviously Dunn has a lot more down to earth, like real world interpretation of everything that's going on, but Dunn has to come to that realization that like, oh, some of what he's saying from this comic book stuff is actually what's going on, but then also Glass has gotten so lost in the sauce of the comic stuff that he's gone completely insane and become a terrorist. So you have the reluctant hero versus like the completely blinded villain, but you still understand them both from a human perspective.
And I think to kind of support what you're saying about him living in that world and becoming lost in the sauce, when that dude goes to buy that piece from him, he's like, yeah, I'm going to give it to my son. He's like, no, you're fucking tripping. Get out.
This is bigger than that. This is bigger than kids.
So for him, it's not just a comic book. It's, like you said, it's his life.
Well, I mean,
that's almost
he
a summary
describes
of maybe
it as
what...
art in that moment.
Yeah, and that's maybe what Shyamalan trying to tell the audience, that comics aren't just for kids. Like, you know, that's not just kid shit. Like, again, everybody, it's so weird to go back and think that there was a time where not the whole world didn't know this and wasn't obsessed with all of this stuff. But,
and Glass is almost like creating his own like self-fulfilling prophecy through the process, because he's so invested in like the fact that there's a possibility that the stuff that's going on in these comic books is something that's possible to happen in real life. And so by going through the process of trying to find this person, he's creating these like larger than life supervillain moves, which are in turn creating the necessity for there to be a hero, which is, like I said, it's the Ouroboros, it's the snake eating its own tail type shit, which is, like I said, really sharp writing.
Another thing I really like too, and you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, John, is that sense of discovery. So yeah, we talked about it with the weights, but beyond that scene when he goes to his wife and he's like, hey, when's the last time I was sick? She's like, oh, I don't know, like Christmas or whatever. And he's like, no, I don't think so. And he's like, have I ever been sick? And that sense of like him discovering it too. It's not like he had it and then hid it, but then we get the weights, and then we get the reveal of like, no, I wasn't injured playing football. Like, I just faked that for you. And so those little reveals and that sense of discovery throughout the whole thing, it helps, because the movie is pretty slow. Like, there's not a lot happening, and especially if you think of it as like a superhero movie, like there's almost no action to this movie. It really is just a character drama. And so
it works well in that regard.
And I think that's why, because you're following along, you're getting pulled along, and it's very interesting because you're like, what the fuck is going on? Especially if you don't know that's like this comic book thing.
Well, and I think because it opens with such a like horrific accident happening where you're just like going along in this train, and then I love when the kid, you get that, again, very Shyamalan, like kid looking at the TV upside down, and then him just going like dad, like when he realizes that his dad was in that accident. And then it's like if Superman didn't have the Fortress of Solitude or the Ghost of Jor-El or whatever interpretation, like some Kryptonian thing explaining to him like, you are from a different planet, these are your powers, you know. It does kind of remind me of the way Smallville handled the Superman story of like, he is just kind of discovering his powers as he grows, and is at first usually freaked out by them and doesn't know how to control them, and is just trying to be a normal person. And I think that they both kind of try to tackle this story in similar ways, at least in the beginning, and then kind of spin off the rails as they go on. But originally when Shyamalan wrote this, it was, you know, a much longer, bigger story that involved the Beast and Glass becoming the bigger supervillain. And much like a Star Wars situation, he was like, okay, I'm going to cut the first act, just the origin story part, and make that the whole first movie. So he always had something Split related in mind with the Beast. Obviously,
yes, if you don't know, Split is kind of a sequel.
It's revealed at the end that it exists in the same universe, because you see David Dunn.
And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because there are a couple.
And then Glass is a direct sequel, right, to both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and has all three characters. And has some cool ideas, just doesn't... I think it's because he was trying to have some sort of marriage between the slow character-driven story he told in Unbreakable and the...
Fast-paced fucking ridiculous shit that's going on in Split.
Yeah, and he couldn't make those things marry together. But Split references in this. So, obviously, kind of retroactive, unless he really did have this all planned out. But there is a child and a mom that David bumps into when he's in that like crowd of people going by him, and he's first kind of realizing what his powers are, and he sees that the boy is being abused by his mother. That is Kevin Wendell Crumb, who was abused by his mother. And grew up to be James.
So you think that was his intention, or he added that to Split?
Well, it's similar to a Iron Man 2 Peter Parker's the little boy with the Iron Man helmet on thing, where it's like, yeah, they probably just thought that those things connect. or it was a fan theory, and he went, I like that. That's confirmed by me, J.K. Rowling style, you know?
Yeah.
Or he could have honestly been like, yeah, I know I have a supervillain character I'm planning who has childhood abuse as their origin story, so I'm going to put a little seed right here, and it may never pay off. And then the other thing is the comic book that... One of the comic books that they're looking at some point is like the superhero, like Sentry character fighting this like green beast thing that has like long nails and is like, you know, all crazy. And that's how the beast is described by one of the personalities in Split, is like, oh, he's got long nails, longer than anybody else, and he's like this big hairy beast. And so people are like, oh, he was hinting to what the future of this story could potentially be if he had introduced the other characters that he wanted to. But I also still do kind of see all three of these, or this and Split in my mind. I like to separate them. To me, Split, I think, works on its own as its own movie with a great James McAvoy performance and a cool little taut thriller. And then there's like, okay, if you like Unbreakable, there's a cute little bonus thing at the end. And Unbreakable, I think, works perfectly well by itself, doesn't need any other sequels or anything. And then I think, again, it was cute that they connected, but once you get to Glass, I mean...
There just wasn't a way to make it work.
It was just like, okay, yeah, you may have had this planned, but you didn't really have this planned.
At least not if they were trying to... If the attempt was strike while the iron's hot, they should have held off and found a better way to connect the stories.
Split blew up, and I think this one kind of floundered, didn't it?
Yeah, it didn't blow up because
I didn't know anybody that saw it except one guy,
and a lot of people just, I'm sure, didn't know what to expect when they went in and didn't know what they got when they walked out.
Well, yeah, and if you come off Sixth Sense, which at the time was considered one of the best horror movies.
And this was marketed as a horror.
Yeah, you go into that, you're like, this wasn't, I mean, it's not scary. It's not really a thriller. I mean, it's got some thriller elements, but, I mean, at the end of the day, it's mostly a drama.
I think they achieve a lot in, like, the thriller space within the mundane based on the characters they create. And my example would be the scene where Elijah is running after David in the arena and then falls down the stairs.
He's running after the guy with the gun.
Yeah, he's running after the guy with the gun. But like he falls down the stairs and like the cane shatters and he's just fucking screaming. Like you can feel the tension building as he's moving because you're like
this guy's gonna trip.
That man's not supposed to move that fast. Some shit's gonna happen.
And it's just on the stairs on his feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like that. And I don't think that a lot of movies will do this, but that scene when what's Bruce Willis' character's name? David? Mm-hmm. And when he finally goes out and is like, okay, I'm going to help somebody, and he goes to this house, like, it's pretty brutal. Like, we find out that the parents haven't died.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like people would do that nowadays. Or, you know, like, he didn't pull that punch. And you could have easily, but
he's not, like, saving a kitten out of a tree.
Yeah. So, I mean, he goes hard, and then people are murdered, and, I mean, the kid still survived, but still, I was like, God, like, good for you, because I really thought the mom was going to have survived. And it was going to be like, well, at least, you know, we have parents, but now it's like orphans.
Yeah.
Sucks, dude. But every superhero's got to have an orphan, right?
Yeah, I mean, and then you give out the award for best orphan.
Well, and just
Chuck E. Cheese.
And in classic superhero fashion, he's got an alliterative name, David Dunn.
So, walk me through. So what's the deal with water? It like makes him sick.
Yeah. So I know the comparison is it's his kryptonite,
right.
and I know that kryptonite gets handled differently in different iterations. I imagine it as being like kryptonite is in Smallville, where it's like it doesn't kill him instantly,
just makes him weak.
It makes his like ability to function go away.
But
like
only if it's touching his skin directly.
Yeah, and so a lot of people have been like, well, then has he ever taken a shower? Like, what happens when he gets, you know, just splashed with water by somebody, or can he drink water? I mean, obviously he can drink water, like that doesn't affect him. Or his powers, but yeah, a lot of people are just like, what about taking a shower? And it's like, well, I mean...
What's up with Shyamalan and water? Because isn't that the same deal?
Well, that's the other thing I was going to say is that he has water themes in like all of his movies. In
Lady in the Water.
Signs, you know, in Lady in the Water, even Avatar, you would say, you know, there's water benders. But yeah, he just loves water and sees it as, I mean, he's got that James Cameron love of water, just not to the point of wanting to go all the way down to the bottom.
Olds on a beach.
There's water at the beach. One thing that I did want to mention...
There's water in every movie.
One thing that I did want to mention that I thought was cute is that Mr. Glass's hair style is modeled after Frederick Douglass. So little
Glasses do.
Yeah, a little
glass.
reference there. Also, I think that
Is that real?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
yeah.
funny.
They based the hairdo off after him, and then it had the word glass in his name. Also, I think that Sam Jackson gives a different performance in this than he gives in most other things.
I was thinking the same thing. It's not super over the top, and
His
voice
like,
is different. Like when he's on and doing his Marvel thing or his Tarantino thing, it's like, hey man.
Yeah. Well, he
But this
really
is like,
leans
hey.
into like projecting, and in this you can tell he's lived a life where he's kind of been the background.
Yeah.
And so he talks
he's
like
a
someone who's
pitiful
lived that
character,
life.
which is not something that you expect out of Sam Jackson. That's again why I think that this, his performance could have been extra big because Willis's is so small. But I'm glad that he didn't go that direction of just being constant, like, I'm tired of these motherfucking David Dunns on these motherfucking trains. So I appreciate that he gives a different performance and that he obviously had a lot of passion for this character enough to come back to it. I think by the time Glass came around, Willis didn't have passion for anything that he was doing, and also potentially was sick. I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe
we
at
don't
that
know how
point,
long he's
but-
been suffering from that brain disease that he's currently dealing with.
Yeah, but I do think that for people who don't think that Willis is a good actor, I think that's super understandable. Just because he's not going crazy,
But I think
There's
if
a lot,
you
like you said, behind the eyes.
In this, and not in everything that he does.
Well, and that's why, and then I think he realized, oh, well, I can just kind of ride out the rest of my. Make a lot of money out of just like barely saying anything and being
just
like
kind of whispering.
and like having a little quip that I say off to the side, and then a stunt double who's also bald is now running off in the distance because I didn't want to be on set that day.
But if you really want some of the best performances of his career, though, if you stick to those early Shyamalan Willis combos, pretty good.
Don't get much better. Well, do we want to wrap it up for Unbreakable? That's a recommend from me.
Recommend for me.
Yep, same here.
Recommends all around, and
I mean, probably what I would say at least top 5, if not higher, for M. Night.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite of M. Night's movies. I would say next to The Sixth Sense, this is probably my favorite Shyamalan movie. I do really like Signs a lot, but I think these two are just like, they're the good ones.
Yeah, real good.
Let's tell them what we're doing for
another Shyamalan this week, but we didn't.
The Visit. Yeah, I considered it. I haven't seen it in a while, and I was like, maybe. But
All right, time for that endless wheel of possibility.
the possibilities are endless. The endless wheel of endless possibilities.
I got it, and I know. I got the wheel of endless possibilities. There we go. It's V. We're V'ing. John, what's on the V card?
All right. So I went with Valentine. You went with Vacancy?
Vacancy.
And then you went with Vampires, John Carpenter's.
Have you
John Carpenter
seen?
joint.
What did you watch? What did you pick?
Valentine.
Have you seen it?
No.
Okay, I've seen it. Have you seen it?
It's an
David
early
Boreanaz?
2000s slasher film.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think so, but it may have been so forgettable that
I've seen it,
erased
like,
it from my mind.
A lot.
Okay.
I just watch it all the time.
yeah.
Because I think back in the day, pay-per-view, and so I used to just leave that shit on.
Yeah.
Anyway, Vacancy. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I remember being okay. It's like
I've seen it once,
thriller.
and I thought it was a pretty cool little
Have you seen it?
thriller.
No.
Okay, cool. And
Hitchcock
then
inspired.
I've never seen John Carpenter's Vampires. Have you?
Nope.
And I saw it recently, which is why I picked it, so that it would be fresh on the brain if it gets picked. If not, I
You
still
doing like
encourage you
a
guys to check it out.
Carpenter watch through or what?
I still haven't gotten around to Ghosts of Mars, just because I wanted to switch it up, because I had done like 6 Carpenter movies with his commentaries in a row, and I didn't want to get burnt out. But I still have Ghosts of Mars on the docket.
Burnt out like the old Carpenter cigarettes.
Yeah, and I want to go back and I want to do Escape from L.A. Basically, just try to watch the movies of his that I haven't seen.
Yeah.
That people say are either terrible, or some people, like in Ghosts of Mars case, say actually isn't that bad. Just got shit on because it wasn't what people were expecting, and I'm like, we'll see. I'll be the judge of that.
It's got Ice Cube.
Well, you know who's gonna be?
Fine.
You know who's gonna be the judge about what we watch?
The
Wheel of Endless Possibilities. Spin that thing.
You motherfucker!
I
Gotta
really
spin
wanna
the
watch
wheel. I gotta
Vacancy.
spin the wheel. We gotta spin the wheel. We gotta spin the wheel. We gotta spin the wheel. We're gonna watch the Vacancy.
Hey! All right.
Slap hands.
Slap hand.
Wow.
Well, no, it's not the wrong one.
Wilson.
Yeah, that's also the wrong Wilson.
I'm sorry, Wilson.
Now I'm just imagining the volleyball just as it's drifting away from Tom Hanks. Just wow.
Got pretty far. We're going to watch Vacancy starring Luke Wilson, who doesn't say wow as often as his brother.
But still does say it, obviously.
Allegedly.
In his regular life.
Yep.
Anyway, hope you enjoyed this bonus, wherever you're watching or listening to it.
Check out our regular shit, and we'll see you next time with Vacancy.
Keep it creepy.
Bye.